So I'm going to talk really generally today about PhET, and a lot of this is going to be stuff that I've rehashed in front of this group and in front of other groups. And what Noah F. asked me to do was kind of give a reintroduction to PhET, where we're at right now, what some of our goals are, what our overarching philosophy is. And then I'll get into more of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, complexity and whatnot. Can everybody see this tiny little screen up here? Is this just ridiculously small, or is it okay? It's okay. Okay. All right. So one of the big ideas behind PhET is it okay if I sit down? You guys want me to stand up and present? All right. That we want our sims, you're all familiar with this, so I'm not going to show you a PhET sim, is that we want interactive simulations to foster productive messing about. And the term messing about kind of means like playing, but in a productive way that's towards learning or towards some goal, but not heavily structured. So that's actually one of our, it's not always the way that sims are used, but it's an ideal that we'd like to kind of strive for if we can, or as much as we can.
As an aside, I've only recently learned, I've heard about this term messing about for a long time, popularized by Andy DeSess and others. Somebody informed me, I don't know that it's true, that it was David Hawkins who coined the term messing about, who was here in the 1950s, one of our MacArthur Award winners in philosophy, and did a bunch of science education work. Interesting to consider the origins and the tremendous legacy that keeps butting us in the face. So, butting us, sorry. Mixed metaphor.
I'll have that for your friend over here. But in order to make this kind of messing about productive, you really need to achieve a balance. And that balance is in terms of making the sims and the task challenging enough that it maintains students' interest, but not so challenging that students get overwhelmed and frustrated to give up. And this is something that people in the video game industry are really good at fine-tuning their games so that people can jump in and start playing right away without getting frustrated and without getting bored. We also want the sims to be flexible tools, and one of the things that the flexibility allows for is that students can kind of guide their own learning path. It's not 100% up to them. There's kind of implicit scaffolding that's built in, but it allows for many different learning paths besides the one that we decided is the right one. And it also allows for a variety of use by teachers. So teachers can use it in homework, they can use it in lecture, they can use it in labs, all sorts of different ways that these simulations can be used. One of the big things about the PhET sims is that the design is research-based. And what I mean by research-based is it comes about through interviews and testing and feedback into our design principles. And so here's some of our design principles. One of them is to use accurate dynamic visual representations. And what I mean by accurate is representing as much of the accepted scientific model as is necessary to convey the correct idea for that concept. And also doing things like showing the invisible, which is something you can do in a computer simulation that you can't necessarily do in the real world. So showing electrons and showing them moving. Create a game-like environment, and game-like is this kind of loaded word. There's a lot of argument in the games and sims community about what's a game, what's a simulation, what's an animation. But by game-like, we basically just mean that it's interactive and engaging. And there are goals, sometimes hidden goals or implicit goals built in that students can find and try to figure things out. Make them highly interactive so that you can do things like grab sliders and move them in real time and see the effects as soon as you move them. Implicit scaffold inquiry through design and controls and representations. And so what this means is, for example, in CCK, the switch really looks like a switch. And so students don't need instructions on how to use this. They pretty much know right away to grab things out of the toolbox, move them into the play area. The switch looks like a switch, and almost everybody knows you grab the handle and you switch it down. So by representing things in certain ways, you don't need to tell students how they work. They're implicitly scaffolded. Provide an intuitive interface, usable without instructions, and then that's the same, what I was basically just saying is that the interface itself lends itself to people using it in ways that are intuitive. Whoops, that wasn't supposed to come up. That's okay. Provide real-time animated
Just in
feedback.
time.
Yeah. Real-time animated feedback as students play. And so again, it's the fact that as soon as you change something, something changes and you can see cause-effect relationships immediately. There are a lot of simulations out there that have a model where you kind of enter some data or some parameters and then hit play and watch it go. And that's, in my opinion, a totally different idea of interactivity than actually changing something in real time and seeing feedback immediately. And allow actions that would be difficult or impossible in the real world. So in CCK, plugging wires together is as simple as getting two things to line up. And as soon as they line up, they snap together and they change color. The wires don't get tangled. You can play with wires all day without getting electrocuted or breaking anything. So all sorts of things that you can't do in the real world. Okay, so that's our philosophy. Here's some evidence of just how successful we've been in using this philosophy to make a tool that actually gets used. This is the number of sims run from our website. Run online is blue, and then downloaded and run is red. We have data on that now. Pretty much steady, almost exponential increase, and in 2010 we had 15 million sims run.
15 million different sims.
15 million different
No,
sims.
wait a second.
15 million sims run either from the website or downloaded. We're projected to hit 22 million in 2011. And Kathy was just telling me that since January we've had over 6 million runs. So we're right on track to have 22 million this year. They're used in K through 12 schools in every state. This is inspired by the fact that they were designed for college students. They got taken up and used by students in elementary school through high school, and in 900 different U.S. colleges. And
That's out of 2,200 universities and colleges in the United States, by way of reference, just for numbers. That's a lot.
Yeah. And so
in 2019, everybody in America will be.
Everybody that's gone to one of our colleges. Yeah.
Not
Something.
22 million people.
Yeah. It's 22 million
sim
sims.
runs. So
2 million of those is me alone.
Yeah, that's right. And our bot that we have out there running Sims. And we've pretty much reached saturation in the physics education community as far as awareness. We pretty much given up having a booth at APT because we don't tell anybody anything new anymore. We're starting to have a booth at everybody that comes by says, "Oh yeah, PhET. I use them every day," and then they walk on. We kind of got tired of spending.
We get a lot of the, you're great.
Yeah, that's
nice, but not justifying.
right. So we kind of got tired of spending a lot of time and money on, which is good for us. So we started branching out into other areas thanks to the two chemists on our team. Now we're getting attention in the chemistry community. And there it is. Yes.
Are you tracking the usage of the different activities that are being posted to the PhET Sim site?
No.
We can track if they've been downloaded.
We can track it. We haven't been tracking it. I think occasionally Trish looks to see which are the most popularly downloaded. It's almost always hers.
Do you ever do like explanations of the activities on the poster sessions that you do, or?
Well, we tell people about the activity database at the poster sessions and at the workshops. And now we're building up more of a community base. So we have a blog and you can follow that, and a Twitter feed and a Facebook page. So we're trying to get the people who do use PhET to be a little bit more linked in so that we can remind them about things like the activity database.
show international use. About 34% of the sim runs are outside of the United States. They get used in over 200 countries and territories. PhET sims have been translated into 58 different languages, and there are 157 translated sims. That's the number of sims times the number of translations for each, 2,657. And part of the reason for this is because we have a very convenient translation utility that people can just load up. They see the original word, and then they put in the word from their language, and they hit compile, basically, and it makes a new sim with their language in it. And we actually have people in different countries that are kind of regulars. Every time a new sim goes up, they translate it, and then there's a version in Greek and Arabic. Sometimes this actually happens within a day. Within 24 to 48 hours of the sim going up, there's instantly like 4 or 5 translations.
And just to add on to that, the website's not translated. So we have the whole website has been translated into 11
Esperanto yet?
Esperanto.
The international.
That's on you, man. Or Klingon.
Steve's doing Klingon, right?
So here's another what I would call our philosophy underlying this effort. One of the biggest things is that PhET, in terms of implementing it in your classroom or using it as a teacher, is a very low risk investment. In fact, it's free. It doesn't cost anything to the school. All you need is computers. And so you don't have to decide or budget for it. You just use it, and if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't work, you're not out much, except for the half hour you wasted on that. Again, it's a flexible tool so that it can be used in lots of different ways, in lots of different environments. We try to make minimal use of text, and this may be part of why the same sims seem to be effective all the way from elementary school up to grad school in some cases, is that language and vocabulary doesn't get in the way as much. So you don't have to, we try to keep the words as short as possible, so labels are seldom more than 3 words long. Usually they're 1 or 2, basically because people stop reading after the 3rd word. We don't have long paragraphs of text or anything like that. We basically try to communicate the ideas through pictorial representations, interactions, and very short, simple words. They're highly interactive. Again, there's a research-based iterative design cycle. So every one of our sims goes through student interviews. That cycles back into the design, and then we interview again sometimes if necessary. We do testing in classrooms and are getting constant feedback. So no sim is ever done. It's always just in the process of constantly being improved. And last, in my opinion, we have a top-notch team of excellent designers, software developers, and researchers that are all working together. So one of the things that I've often seen in conferences, the people that are making the sims are doing the design, they're doing the research, and they're doing the coding all by themselves with maybe an advisor or something like that. And I'm actually really impressed that those people can produce what they produce. But there's really no substitute for having a division of labor amongst experts in different areas that can also come back and work well together. Okay, so that's my pitch for PhET and why I think we've been successful. So I'll just open it up for questions and comments right now before I get into the complexity stuff. Or did I just tell you all stuff you already knew?
No, it's great. Yeah. Great. And at some point, it'll be nice to put the PhET team on the spot to review a variety of the different, similar tour of the research studies that are going on around PhET, because now it spans into really interesting areas, particularly middle school, and we'll see a little bit of that here. But that's something that we used to be a little bit more covert about, and I think as our research group has established, our investigation into student learning outside introductory college physics, we're allowed to be more overt about, so we should be, and celebrate that.
What's the future of sort of physics college level PhET sim development? So I noticed, there's a new one. Is this still ongoing, or is PhET really moving into chemistry in middle school? And
it's still ongoing, but a larger fraction of our efforts is going into other disciplines, chemistry, biology, and some geoscience. But we're still making physics sims.
Yeah, so we have like one more year on an NSF grant that is specifically targeting undergraduate level chemistry and physics. And we only have one more year because I'm going to ask for an extension. So the bulk of our funding will be for middle school physical science and maybe even moving into math. So it's evolving. I'm sure we'll keep making some undergraduate level physics sims because
Let me turn the question. Let me turn the question around though, Steve. What's missing? I mean, are there huge gaps? I mean, with 80 different sims now, 100 different sims, a lot of them in physics, at least 50 some. Most of the areas that I want to teach are covered.
There's nothing on normal modes, chaotic systems.
I'm sure we can come
I
up with a lot.
I got a list of about
like
10
you don't
things.
have Gauss's law in there. We haven't dealt with 3D topics really. Like Gauss's law are showing magnetic and electric fields in a way together, and
I was asking Steve. I'm kidding. I'm teasing.
So that was the cleanest, most informative 20-minute summary I've ever seen of PhET.
That was a 5-minute summary.
Yeah, right. The only thing I would add is a slide about how expensive PhET is to maintain. And people imagine, PhET, great. They don't realize it's a big operation, very pricey. It's only because of the enormous efforts of Kathy, Carl, and Wendy getting funds that it's alive.
And that feeds back into the maintaining its freeness, which I'd say I've been going and talking. I've been going to NSF meetings and seeing their model for sustainable educational innovations, and
They don't have one?
well, they don't have much of a sustainability model. They have an innovation model. And then after the innovation is done, their response is, in a nutshell, well, see who wants to pick it up and sell it for you. And so they say, find venture capitalists or textbook companies or something like that want to take your product and resell it, and that's how it'll get disseminated and sustainable.
Take your product and destroy it.
Well, right. So the model that PhET has of maintaining it being free and available on a website and even open source is pretty unique. And right now, we've had to kind of work the system to keep maintaining funds. And it's not just a matter of once PhET is done in a website, even if we all disappeared, it could just sit on the server. There's actually a tremendous amount of time that goes into just maintain its availability in the first place.
I heard an odd statistic about this. I'm not positive about the exact number, but I think Dave Pritchard says the Open Courseware project at MIT, even if they weren't to make new courses, just to maintain what it is they have and support that, $500,000 a year. And I don't disbelieve that. It's not because the money's necessarily being wasted and bloating things. It's just you don't put stuff up there and it stays. So.
Have you guys considered anything similar to like the peer-to-peer kind of methods for maintaining the files, if nothing else, or looked into any sort of distributed? Yeah, I'm just trying to see if they've looked into any of the like peer-to-peer kind of distributed, not darknet. There's a certain word that I'm just blanking on for how people share their bandwidth and can like host things for free and blah blah blah. I mean, you can get millions of movies, found online.
Oh.
That's just slightly
Well,
different than
torrents.
server side.
Yeah,
Torrents are
torrent
different than,
Right.
but
Yeah.
as far as
Well,
words
the
go.
not
thing
just-
is that
yeah.
hardly anybody knows how to use any of those technologies, except for geeks and girls.
To reach 13 million downloads a year, or let's say 200 million downloads a year, there's no reason why I couldn't go there. That's something that has to have active, productive maintenance on. I think. Anyway, let's continue and move on because Noah has another talk to give.
Yeah. Okay, so this is what I called it. Complexity
That's not what I
learning
called it.
interactive. That's what I called it. Complexity learning interactive computer simulations. I'm going to have a little bit of data. It's mostly going to be a bunch of ideas, and I'm going to bat them around. Some of them you all have seen before. Some of them I've just reframed, or maybe you've forgotten that you saw them. That's good. Tell me something completely different.
Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
louder? This thing is...
And I'll stand up because that's probably better. So I want to start with this. How many of you all have seen the iWheel?
Yeah, I love it.
Good. Show of hands. How many people have seen the iWheel? Okay. All right. So this is not a real product. It's from The Onion, but it's a parody of a real product. And one of the taglines in their ad is, "Nothing is more simple than a single giant button." And this seems to be, they're obviously making fun of Apple and the fact that they like to simplify things by removing controls from the interface. With the idea that that's what it means for something to be simple. Less buttons, simpler. Right? Well, the thing that I'm going to try to convince you of is that is way too simple a way of thinking about it. And less buttons isn't necessarily simpler. And if we think about it in a more sophisticated way, we can understand what complexity really means. Here's another simple airplane cockpit. This has way more than one giant button. It's got probably about 1,500 buttons and controls, and they're all different. Now, the thing about this system is that because they're all different, it's actually not nearly as complex as it looks. And the reason the system isn't as complex as it looks is because each button has a specific thing that it does. And there's actually a fairly intuitive mapping between what the button looks like and what it actually does. Most of the buttons have a single operation that they do. So if you compare this to the Mac wheel, you can imagine having a laptop PC that has about 1 million different things that it does, and it has one button. Or you can have an airplane cockpit that does about 5,000 things and has about 5,000 buttons. The question is, which one of those two things do you think is more complex to use? Okay, well, we'll figure it out. The other thing is that people often talk about cognitive load and the idea that if you have too many controls or you have too many representations, people experience cognitive overload and then they can't function in these systems. Well, pilots go and they sit in this cockpit and the plane takes off and it flies at 30,000 feet and then it lands just fine. It happens, 1 million times a day, and none of these pilots suffer from cognitive overload. So one of the questions is, how could that be if there's all these buttons and all this crap to pay attention to? And oh no, why did that happen? Well, this is one of the things that cause cognitive overload. If you can't see it, this says Hutchins 1995, and the name of the paper is How a Cockpit Remembers Its Speeds. And the question is, how do pilots manage all this? And the answer is they don't have to, largely. And one of the reasons that they don't have to is that you can change the question from what is the system that's doing the thinking in this situation? Is it the pilot doing all the thinking in their head that's experienced cognitive overload from all these buttons? And what Hutchins says is that if you expand that system so that it's not the pilot's brain that's doing all the thinking, but it's the entire system, including the cockpit and all the buttons and all the things that the plane is also remembering for the pilot, then it looks like a much lower load on the pilot themselves. There's 2 points here. One is that complexity doesn't just have to do with the number of controls. And the other is that if you think about the thing that's doing the thinking as this larger system, then you can understand what's happening in that system, I think, better than if you just focus on what individuals are doing. Okay, I think you've all seen the doors.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
How many hours is a pilot trained before they're allowed to fly a plane?
A lot. I don't know. Anybody have a pilot's
How many
license?
hours is a person trained before they're
Yeah, I
allowed
think
to
1,000 hours. Yeah, 1,000 hours, couple thousand
How
hours.
many hours before they're allowed to run a sim?
Sim on a pilot sim, an airplane
No.
sim.
Oh, you
That's
mean
one
it's a
of the
Facetious question.
Are these
Yeah.
actually comparable tasks? I mean, does
No.
one inform the other? The fact
No,
that
of course
a
not.
pilot has 1,000 hours of training
Nope.
under all kinds of conditions.
I'm,
How many hours of training does somebody have to use a computer, Michael?
What are they doing with the computer?
Running a simulator.
Depends. I mean, it depends.
They have hours of training, that's for sure. I mean, the point is, they use language. I mean, the point is they're not comparable systems, and Noah's not asking somebody to fly a plane with all of this. But they are comparable in the sense that we build on the tools that people have that come to the situation, and it's a huge amount of training for people to participate in cultural systems, such as running a computer simulation, that is comparable to flying an airplane.
I would say that there's actually a lot of hidden training
Yeah.
or implicit training that somebody has due to just their life experiences before they sit down in front of that simulation. And you have, thousands of hours of flight training so that you can get good at flying an airplane.
This could be a question of disciplinary, right?
Or
you could
cultural
have
difference.
thousands of hours of interactions with physical objects, and you could have 0 hours of meaningful interaction with chemical concepts or biological or the behavior pattern of molecules. So it's worth considering that often physics is physical and immediate in a way that other disciplines are not.
Could be.
Or not.
So I think you've all seen my doors. How many of you would pull this one? Everybody. How many of you would pull this one? Nobody. The idea is that you can design tools so that they lead naturally to their intended uses. And even though you need 1,000 hours or 1,500 hours to learn how to fly an airplane well, you don't need any hours to learn how to turn it on or how to steer.
You need lots of
steer
hours.
this way. You need time to get good at it.
A child does. I mean, that's it.
The question is, how come if you sit down in an airplane cockpit,
Right.
you need to learn what everything does, but somebody doesn't have to tell you
You push
that
the button.
thing is a button. In order to make it work, push it. Right? Now, if it's a badly designed button, then somebody does have to tell you. And poorly designed tools lead to frustration, or in some cases, disaster. The 3 Mile Island accident actually is because the control system at the new power plant was badly designed. So I'm going to start talking about this by talking about something that everybody in here has seen. And this is a not so modern but fairly modern cellular phone. Until about 5 years ago, people used these for calling people. And so they had a keypad that was well designed for calling people. Because of the phone numbers, you can type in the numbers, and it's arranged in a square. The question is, what if it was arranged this way, in a big circle? Which one of these two arrangements of the keys do you think would be easier to use?
I think my thumb likes the idea of the circle, but the grid's just easier to keep track of the relative positions of the buttons.
Okay.
Circle's good if it's mechanical.
Circle is a waste of space.
Circles are a waste of
Poor
space.
use of real estate, and real estate on the computer screen or on your display panel is absolutely crucial. You've got limited real estate. You've got to use it efficiently.
Okay. But in that picture, there's like space in between that you could put something pretty on the left, but and the overall size is about the same, whereas on the right it's totally filled.
Okay. So what if you've been using one of these your whole life? Right?
What's that?
Yeah. Right.
Sorry, for the undergrads, that also is a telephone.
Right. There's a difference between dial and button.
Okay,
dialing.
so bear with me for a second. Up until about 1980, this is what everybody knew. This is what everybody used. If you've been using this your whole life, you know where all these buttons are. Not buttons. You know where the numbers are. Right? If your finger is used to doing this, I would argue that the one on the left is probably going to be faster, more efficient, and more intuitive than the one.
Yeah, why does it go horizontally and not vertically, for instance? Why are there 3 in a row and not 4 in a row?
You want to make it a square.
Square.
No, there's 4 in a column.
No, 3 or 4 in a column.
You got to ask an engineer. I don't know.
Well, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Somebody made this decision, but they sure didn't ask me. Maybe it was intentional, but maybe not. I don't.
I actually think this is probably the fastest arrangement to have, at least the square. You ever tried typing numbers in the number keys at the top of your
Why not
keyboard?
the 1, 2, 3 down?
But also, like, the keypad could also be put on the phone this way, the slimline phone.
Yeah.
So it's more vertical space.
It's probably because people are used to reading left to right.
Yeah.
In the
Because
US.
you double
America.
the numbers double up with the
All right,
letters.
Noah would prefer one in the upper right-hand
See
corner.
what happens?
Working
Yeah,
its way
but
to
what
the-
about 10 key? Because it's got a totally different setup.
Yeah.
10 key?
What's 10
What's 10 key?
For people
On a computer.
on a computer, that little space on the right.
Oh.
It's
The
they're
number-
inverted in
oh,
order.
so different for
Right.
people
The
who
1,
have
2,
to,
3 is at the bottom.
9's on
like
top.
cashiers used to
Yeah.
have to do.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a totally different arrangement. Goes from
Well,
right
It's
to the top.
upside down.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And,
It's a good question.
There's
There's probably a good reason for that.
Seems intuitive in that situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that the point I'm trying to make is that this is in a way saying that the user's prior knowledge actually plays a role in whether the interface is intuitive and how complex it's perceived to be. It's not just an inherent property of the interface itself. And people do this. So around 1980, they started making telephones that looked like this. So this is push buttons, and they're arranged in a circle. There's still one of these at the hotel I was just staying at in Berkeley.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to be cute.
Well, check out the finger slot right next to the 1.
Yeah, they put this so it looks like an old phone.
Finger stop.
And in a way, this was kind of a transition technology. So what I would say is, in some ways, this is actually a blend of these two technologies. People know they're going here, or designers knew that they wanted to get people here, and people were here, and so they made this. Although, actually, this is from a Minnie Mouse phone.
You think that was a deliberate transition model?
Oh, yeah.
So-
I remember those phones being around.
Yeah, but I
a
don't
lot
see
of
why you would
phones.
think that was a transition model. I would think that so I remember the annoying feature of having to, when I had a 9 in my number, and the 9 is a pain in the neck. So you want to go to a push button. It's
You
much
had to wait,
faster and
undergrads,
easier.
you had to wait for it to
But
download
this
with
is
that.
what a phone is.
That's not gonna look
So
like long finger.
this is what a phone is. The black picture in the top is what everybody's cultural understanding of what a phone is. So making a change to the Minnie Mouse keypad is simply making that phone easier to use, but keeping it the way it was, not transitioning. I didn't understand your statement that they were intentionally transitioning us to the new technology and the new idea.
So
I don't think that's what was happening at all. I think it was just a simple step, a technological advance on that old phone that didn't change its essence, but made it easier and quicker. So I don't see it as a...
You need a historic. I think people were using push buttons with before they came up with these fake rotary phones.
Yeah, well, we had a push-button phone in our house that looked just like your phone keypad.
Well, okay, so I don't want to get into too much of an argument about the intentions
yeah.
of the engineers.
I thought that's what you were suggesting.
The purpose that this served, what we can learn from this example, is that whether or not it was intentional, I think this served as a transition. Okay? Because you had to have touch tone functionality, but you wanted an interface that people were accustomed to.
But no, this all depends on the historic timing. I mean, I remember that you didn't go from that to that. You went from that to a square keyboard. And these are nostalgic throwbacks, these are not stepping stones from one to the other. These are people, it's cute. So we'll that wasn't the thing that replaced the rotary phone.
There were phones during that time that looked like this.
I never saw one.
Okay.
So
that's not the major point here. I don't think.
Part of it is, right? The question is there some underlying rationale driving this? Or is this just, a fluky little style thing? It's kitsch. I mean, whatever you want to say it is. The question is, you have to know. I remember those phones going right to push button. I mean, they were ground unattractive push buttons originally, I think. But, and the reason the phone looks that way is the way the dialing mechanism works, right? The way it sends signals.
Yes, the rotary.
The rotary phone does.
Yeah.
There was a reason it was rotary to begin with. When that reason was
so
gone,
I need to go and find a picture of a phone from 1982 that actually looks like this. I did a bad job of picking one that's nostalgic. But, again, the point is basically that you can imagine this as being trying to adapt to one constraint, one design constraint, while also satisfying another design constraint, which is people's familiar. If it's not true, consider it a thought experiment. But I think it is true. So then, and this is true, I know for sure, because I lived through it just recently, which is the purpose of the telephone changed. And the way it changed is that people stopped using it just to make calls and started using it to dial, to write text. This is a function that it was not at all designed to do. In fact, these letters that are on here were on the old phones, but they were never designed to type with. They were designed so that you could say 1-800, beat whatever, and somebody would know.
It was the prefixes. It was the area code.
Oh, right.
It was the exchange prefixes.
Right.
They all had, they were all names, not numbers.
But so there's a challenge, which is how can you type on a phone? And the nice thing is that functionality was already built in a sense. You could type letters on this. The problem is it's really hard to do, right? I don't know how many people in here are good at typing paragraphs with that keyboard over there, but I'm not. Right? In order to type just the word cat, you have to hit 2 3 times, then you have to wait, then you have to hit 2 again, then you have to wait, then you have to hit 8, and then you have to make sure that you don't hit 8 again before you hit space. Although some people, undergraduates in your classes, can do this with one hand, out of sight, while they're supposedly listening to your lecture. So it's not impossible, it's just really difficult.
But it has no effect.
There's another keyboard design that's vastly superior to this, and that's the QWERTY keyboard. And the reason it's vastly superior is because I think everybody in here would be much faster typing on this keyboard than on that keyboard. But it's not just that you're faster because you practice at it. Even people that are not practiced at it, that have spent hardly any time, can type on this keyboard by hunting and pecking.
But we do know that that's the suboptimal design for the keyboard.
Right.
Yeah,
this is the example of your hybrid node, in fact, because the Dvorak keyboard. I mean, this is a legacy of embedding the mechanical device in your digital system. Was designed to slow you down.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the answer to your push button, which in fact I've since looked up, and the first 10 buttons was a push button in that setup, 1963.
Oh. Yeah. So the point is that this system over here is, I'm going to argue, even though it's got more buttons, it's less complex than this system.
Yeah.
Again, the number of controls is not related necessarily to the complexity. And this is less complex for a whole bunch of reasons. One of them is that the function of each of these controls is clear. Right? This one does X, this one does C. Over here, you have to know the rules for this system in order to know how to operate. You don't already know the rules, then you're hosed. This one you don't need to know any rules. In fact, you don't need any instructions except I push the button with the letter on it. And the other thing is that this one, not only do you need to know the rules, but it has multiple operations per button. So that actually makes it more complex than something that has more buttons, but it has less operations per button.
Just to clarify, I mean, I also want to tease this out a little bit more, just because there's only one operation per button, which is to push it.
Right.
But it means different things.
Oh, what I mean by operation is function.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what even makes it yet more complicated.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So this isn't just PQRS.
Right.
It's like, well, P is one operation. Q takes two pushes. So it actually takes two operations. So cell phone designers know about this, so they design things like this, where now you have a QWERTY keyboard that slides out of the bottom of the phone, and now it's great for typing. Okay? Well, pretty good for typing if you have dwarf-sized phones. So it does that well now. And the question is, wait a minute, it's supposed to be a phone, right? How are you supposed to enter phone numbers into this thing? Because that worked really well for entering phone numbers. So what they do is they put a tiny little phone number pattern here, so that now you can enter phone numbers and it has the same approach.
So that device is less about telephoning people and more about typing. I mean, if that's the main operation for you to...
Right.
Well, you have the number saved. You only need to push a button to call someone now.
I'm sorry.
You don't have to text the number to call someone.
Oh,
If you have the number
right.
saved.
Yeah.
Right.
You have to spell out their name. Right.
Exactly.
And remember, this is all because it's constrained to fit in a small place, right? If you remove those constraints, then I think it was just said before, a lot of people's keyboard have extended keyboards where they can put in numbers independently.
Yep.
So I mean, this is an attempt to fit everything into a defined space, which is a different design constraint again.
So you're always working within design constraints, and you're always trying to simultaneously satisfy the design constraints and the usage scenarios that we expect, and the prior knowledge and intuitions of the user. Right? And one of the things is that in all of these cases, especially cell phones, if you need to provide explicit instructions on how to use this, I'm pretty sure people wouldn't mind it. So, all right, now back to Sims. So this is a big framing up front. Cell phones. The basic idea is that complexity doesn't just have to do with number of controls. It has to do with a whole bunch of things. It has to do with the mappings between the control and what it does. It has to do with whether the controls are draw on intuitions that the users already have. And so we try to do that in the PhET simulations. So for example, sliders are things that you don't need instructions how to use. So you can sit down and immediately know that that's something you can grab and move back and forth. But then they see things happening and they start getting into this game-like environment. These boxes are buttons, you click them, everything is fairly intuitive. So the question is this simple and is that complex? And I don't know, so I'm asking you.
What do you want them to do with it?
I want them to mess about. I want students to sit down and play around and understand the system that they're
I think you can't define whether something is simple or complex until you know what it's supposed to do.
I'm sorry,
I think you have to know what it does, what it's supposed to do, in order to be able to tell whether it does it in a simple or complex way. I'm sure that the same design could do certain things very simply, example, people have all kinds of function buttons on their computer. Once you learn all the functions, or you've designed it, now it becomes simple in a way. But it was complex before you, I mean, you know, if you wanted to go through all the sub-menus to figure it out, that's one thing. But if I have, you know, option X reads text to me, then I don't have to go into any other place.
So you're saying that something that has a whole bunch of functions that you have to learn could be complicated at first.
And it could become simple once you know them.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
But I mean, that's a way of saying that
Everything is like
if you can navigate it intuitively, immediately, whether immediately is after you know what all those things are supposed to do or not, then it's simple.
Depends.
So
I mean, if you have
so-
something that's
Which is
really
based on the comments you made already, which is that it has to be based on the user's sense.
right. Many wristwatches have only 2 or 3 buttons on them, and they're no matter how many times I've experienced this, it takes me 20 minutes to figure out how to change the alarm setting. So it's not simple.
Okay, so
I think the task is critical. But what the task
you said
is,
you need to know what it does.
what you want it to do.
Who's you?
The user. What do you
The user
or the designer? What do you want the designer and the user have to? In theory, they should have the same idea what they want to do,
Okay.
and they should be
As a
explicit
teacher
about it.
who's used the,
Yeah, actually,
to make things happen on the left is very simple. To get it to actually orbit is very challenging, getting to understand that mechanic. Right, getting it to work for students is relatively complex because they don't know enough about circuit design.
Circuit design.
But once they have that familiarity with what the things on the right do, then it's very simple to make things happen.
Okay.
I mean, if this was a simple function, there wouldn't be so many badly designed things on the marketplace that then fail, right? So part of the problem is deciding what it is. You know, if I use a computer for only do 4 things on a regular basis, then I don't need it to do. You know, it doesn't help me if it can do a million other things and I don't give a rat's ass.
Well, that's a good point. That one of the ways that you can make things simpler is reducing the total number of features that you have to understand.
It's the rare Mac user who goes into the terminal and starts screwing with the code. Okay, so even though it's there, you never touch that button.
Right.
Well, unless you came from Unix.
I'm just saying that it's the person you are selling, the average person you're selling it to, doesn't even want to know that there's a terminal function on that computer.
But my point is to them, yes, it's complex, but to Robert, no, it's not complex. That's the point.
I read my mail.
Okay, so
Bring the Emacs.
I'm going to run out of time.
Yeah, could we hold discussion till the end and restrict ourselves to pointed questions with brief answers, and then.
We have to be on 25.
Yeah, I know. All right, so the idea is that, and you guys brought it up, is that there are at least two things that can be complex about this. One is the interface itself, and whether you know what it does or not, whether you at least have some idea of what to do first. So even with this simulation, which is fairly complex to understand the system, it's fairly simple in terms of knowing what to do first. And so you sit down and they just grab stuff, and they start dragging it out here. And then there are cues, like colors at the ends of the wires that cue them, and they can plug things together. So in terms of usability, it's actually fairly simple because it draws on people's intuitions. Understanding what's going on here is more complex initially, but because it has a usable interface, I'm going to argue that learning of the sim is not as complicated as it would be if there was a different design. And the same over here, the underlying concepts of this are actually fairly complicated. I mean, understanding orbits and Newton's laws. But again, the sim itself is fairly simple.
The do you distinguish learning the sim and learning the science behind it?
A little, not really. I'm not sure. I'm going to get into that a little bit. So I'm going to get into that by talking about what I'm calling a distributed constructivist model. And the idea here is that you have some content and you have a student, and there is at least a two-way interaction between the content and the student, and it's mediated by a tool. This is my model, this is Podolofsky's model, and so this interaction is mediated by, say, a sim in this case. Then what I'm going to say, and this is drawing on Hutchins and other distributed cognition people, is that this is the cognitive system. Okay? So that's not the cognitive system that I'm looking at right now. I'm looking at this system. And what does this system learn? So that's the question. What does learning look like in this system, if that's the unit of analysis that we do?
Well, that wasn't a question.
Sure. Yes, that's the question. What does learning look like? Actually, I'm running out of time, so I can't ask you guys any more questions because I really want to play this clip of students. So these are some 10-year-olds that we sat down, Emily and I sat down and talked to after they'd used some sims in class down in Dallas. And they have this part in their class where the...
Well, that's not annoying at all.
Yeah. So they have this part, the teachers have started doing this thing where before they get into a guided activity, the students sit down with a sim for about 5 minutes and just play. Just do whatever they want without any instructions other than play around and see what you can figure out. And then afterwards they kind of have the students give us a class and ask them what they figured out. And hopefully you'll be able to...
They're doing something on the...
Super.
Yeah.
Okay.
Elevator.
Hopefully you'll be able to hear this.
Do you want me to go grab the speakers?
My speakers
Why
are
don't
pretty,
you just read
my
it out?
speakers are pretty loud. And
Okay.
yeah, I have transcript of it. Yeah, okay. I'm just going to have to read it, no matter what. So I was talking to the students, and I say, so you don't like the ones that aren't very specific about what you're supposed to do, because then you have to ask the teacher to figure out what the question is asking you. They were talking about how do you know whether you're learning the right things. I asked them, what about at the beginning when the teacher is asking you to play around with the simulation for a few minutes before you started the activity? And they all start talking at once, and then one of them says, that's how I popped it. And she's talking about the gas properties sim where she pops the lid off of it. You can pop the lid off of the container. Sorry, that's not it. It's the
She crashes.
where she made the planet explode. Where she made the planet explode, she popped it. So that's how you pop it. And another student says, I think it's better than having the teacher tell you just do this, so it actually explores it. So you actually know how everything works. So once you go, you know how everything works. So, okay, how about the rest of you guys? What do you think about playing around without any instructions first? And they all say at the same time, fun. And one of them says, it's like how I do it on some of my video games without reading the instructions first. It's like, oh, yeah. And another one says, that's what I do. And another one says, I just skip everything. And then they all start talking at once again. One of them says, yeah, you know, like with Call of Duty, I just push all the buttons. So I asked him, what if the whole class was like that? Where she just said, here's a simulation, play with it for the whole time. And here about half of them say no, and about half of them say that would be cool. So no clear consensus on whether they should just play the whole time. One of them says, that wouldn't be cool because you wouldn't learn anything. You'd just be playing around with the thing. Okay? Another one says, but you also learn while you're playing. This little girl that's sitting across from us. But you don't know what you're learning. And And another one says, that would be fun, because the first time I played Call of Duty, I didn't know how to play. I just pushed everything. Pushed everything? And then they kind of fizzled out a little bit, so I tried to get them talking about it some more. So that was a really interesting conversation you guys just had. You were saying that, how do you know you're not learning anything? And you said you're not learning anything if you're just playing. So how do you know what you're learning? Yeah, how do you know if you're learning or not? And they all laugh and kind of giggle. And I says, by reading the school? And I said, okay, it's not quite what I was asking. You might be totally right. Like maybe you could, says, and this one little boy says, you might be learning, but you don't know what it's called. So when they ask you a question, you don't actually know what topic it was under. And this little girl that's sitting across, she's sitting in her chair like this. And she gets up and she goes, unless it comes with a picture. Okay? Very animated and adamant about it. And the little boy says, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. And I said, all right, now it's time to go. So these students, 5th graders, are, I think, having a fairly deep epistemic debate about how do you know what you're learning, how do you know whether you're learning, or whether it's the right thing to be learning, and do you have to have the teacher come along and tell you this is what you're supposed to be learning right now? If you have a picture, can that be a cue as to what it is you're supposed to be learning without somebody telling you? And can you learn by just sitting down and playing and just pushing the buttons until things start to make sense together? I'm going to open it up again and say, who do you agree with? Little girl student? Little boy student?
Well, I don't think that they're actually disagreeing with each other. I think they're agreeing that they could be learning.
Uh-huh.
It's just how to assess that is what they're disagreeing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. They're agreeing that you're learning something. There's something that you're learning while you're playing. But there's this other type of learning, or this other thing you're supposed to be learning. That you might be learning all kinds of stuff, and it might even be really, really useful and lots of fun. But until the teacher comes along and tells you this is what you're supposed to be learning, then you don't know if it was useful or not.
So part of what it's going back to is a transmission teaching method. The teacher says what's right, and that's clearly what the girl is saying. You know, I have to know what the teacher thinks is right to know whether I've learned the right thing, which I think is a terrible thing, but
I was interpreting it differently. I was just thinking they were talking about language, you know, because you don't have any language in this sim. That they were saying, well, I could learn all this stuff, but then I wouldn't know how to answer any questions because I wouldn't know what it's called. And she's saying, well, if you had a picture, then you could, you know, you could use the picture to answer. You know, if the picture was the same as the sim, then you'd be okay. But if you had to translate into words, you wouldn't be okay. So that's. So it could be on the top of their mind anyway.
I was just thinking,
so anyway, that's how I
more in
interpret
terms of how, you know, if it's not articulated, then like you might develop a feel for something, you know, but you couldn't say, like, for example, what was the rule that's, you know, the underlying principle for why that works or whatever, because there's just been no articulation of what's being learned in the way. So the student might be learning things, not even be consciously aware that they knew that. You know, even though they learned it.
So they're learning something, but they're not consciously aware that they've learned it.
So are you saying that they're aware that they're not consciously aware of what they're learning?
The academic way.
It's more than just that, you know, I mean, the learning that's going on, I mean, there can be all sorts of things that are learned at the time, and, you know, you don't know which is relevant, first of all, and you might not even be able to articulate what it is that you actually learned along the way. You might have learned something, but you know, to have taken it one step further to say that there's like a rule or a reason for why it's that way, I don't think you necessarily have that.
Are you saying they're aware of that thing that you just said?
It seems like what they're saying to me.
That's good.
So the question is, are they learning? I think this is a very incredibly good point. I mean, the question is, are they learning how to play this game? In which case, do they learn have they learned how to play games from previous game experiences? Or in like one of these war games, do they appreciate ballistic motion? Right? I mean, so the question becomes,
appreciate.
What is it they're learning? Are they learning to play the PhET simulation, or are they learning physics?
I don't think that's the question. I think the question is, well, I don't know what the question is.
Well, then you can't be sure that wasn't it. Because
there's two things going on, what they can learn as kind of a construct, and their ability to reflect on their own learning, or not learning, or assessment of their learning, or awareness of they're not sure what learning means, which is another thing. There's two different possible things that you're trying to make with this.
But you could get a reflection by saying, well, what are the common things you do playing these kind of games?
Well,
right?
one of the things is that these students all recognize that they can sit down at a video game or a PhET simulation and just start pushing buttons and figure stuff out.
So they learned that already. They knew that because they played with them.
They knew that about learning.
They
learned specifically about the sim.
And
now.
they know that about Sims now.
Right.
Because they played with the Sims. And they've been given this opportunity to engage with the Sims in that mode.
And they learn about the content of the sim is the argument in some sense.
So the argument the students are having, they're all on the same page in terms of I can sit down, start playing around, and I get useful stuff.
And make things happen.
And I can make things happen, and I can even learn stuff that way, right? The question is, what is the substance of that stuff, and how well does it align with what the teacher wants me to know? Or put another way, how well does it align with what the teacher is saying I should know? So,
or what the teacher thinks they learn.
Or what the teacher, what do you mean?
What behavior, they may produce a behavior that the teacher is misinterpreting as understanding of the problem.
Yeah, or you could have the opposite. It's the teacher thinks they don't understand when really they do, and they were just asking the wrong question. You can actually get quite a bit out of what it appears that students understand by watching what they're doing with the simulation. And then actually if you come along and ask them a question that uses a lot of jargon or frames it in a way that that doesn't make as much sense, it can appear that they don't understand, say, gravitational orbits or gravitational forces.
This is the tricky thing between distinguishing a reflex behavior and a cognitively based behavior. Right? I mean, you can get dogs to do a lot of weird things. I'm not sure they're thinking about a lot.
I don't think it's like behaviorist or versus cognitive. I think it's in a way it's a matter of communication. And what is the nature of the knowledge that students are picking up from the sim? And if they can understand how the gravity in orbit sim works and why the pieces in there behave the way they do, could you then make a claim that students understand Newtonian gravitation?
So I would argue you would have to examine how you, as the investigator, tries to extract what the student knows and be sure that you're not providing a scaffold for them which they don't actually have.
Right.
So that you're misinterpreting their understanding because the way you're asking. You're going to simplify the question out of the jargon, the bad jargon, and you're going to bring it in, and by the time you're done, you've essentially told them what to tell you.
I mean, for this, I think you're right. You have to be careful how you ask the question, what's happening with this. And I think what you might, there are two related frames that you might draw from. We still haven't defined what learning is here. May be helpful. Maybe not.
That's the question.
Well, I mean, I'd say the learning is the internalization of social norms and practices, and then the question is, whose norms and practices are you internalizing and to what ends? But that one way that's productively talked about in terms of this might be preparation for future learning, this messing about. It's an interesting kind of framing to say people are now primed and ready for participating. Now, preparation itself is learning, I would argue, but, it's got a specialized term, which is interesting. And then the other is Valerie's work that demonstrates that by doing this and by messing about in coordinated ways around, then people are able to do things in the more canonical, physical, or symbolic world in different ways. And as a result of that, they're able to do other things. So I'd say that's, and I think that's in fact what they're talking about. Maybe they don't know it.
I think I agree with that. The other angle on this that speaks to me is the value that the students place in different types of knowledge, or different framings on what counts as legitimate knowledge to have. And one of the things that comes out of a lot of the simulation literature is that in order for people to learn something, they can't just sit there and play around. There has to be feedback from a teacher or somebody to say, this is what you were supposed to be learning. There's supposed to be reflection. Yes?
That's within the sociocultural cognitive system of the school. My guess is that their answers or the things that they say are going to be different if they're not in the school setting. That their appeal to authority would be either non-existent or different if they were at the arcade.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, just slightly off what you were saying, it seems like the division they're making is sort of like, you know, they're recognizing that they can learn something while having fun, but if they learn something while having fun, then that's probably not what the teacher was hoping that they would learn.
Well, they're saying that they don't know. They don't know if that thing that they were learning while they were having fun is the thing that they were supposed to be learning or not, right? I think they're saying they're not sure. They're saying they're learning lots of things and they find whatever they're learning valuable. They're not sure if that thing is valuable to the teacher at that particular point in time. It could be that they learned the thing that's valuable. In fact, they might even be saying, we learned a whole bunch of stuff, and the thing is that we don't know which one of all those things that we learned is the one thing that the teacher wants to know right now.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I think you're taking a little extra step there because, I mean, how do you know that the students value what they learn? That they think it's important, even though they recognize it?
I think so.
That's my
interpretation of their. What's that?
I'm just asking what points to them. You said that they value it, and they don't necessarily know if the teacher values it. And I'm saying I don't know if they necessarily value it themselves.
One is because the student, especially the Call of Duty student, is relating the idea of what he learns by just pushing buttons to a personal experience that he has.
And success in the game.
And success in the game. Right? Yeah, exactly. And that tells, I mean, it's hard for me to think of a way that you could learn how to play Call of Duty and not, I mean, for this kid and not value that knowledge that he's gained from it. And he's trying to direct
that brings entertainment. I mean, you know,
he's saying that I can sit down and learn stuff from this the same way that I can in video games. I think that not just, it's hard to see from the transcript. Partly it's their body language and what I would call the passion that these kids were displaying while they were talking to each other about this topic that tells me that they were really, I can't think of a way to pick it apart into anything more mechanistic than saying they valued the knowledge that they were bringing up. It's a good question.
It's an inference, though.
It's an inference. It's definitely an inference. It's a good question. How do I know that they value the things that they're telling me that they?
Well, I think they did give us. It's not here, but they did give us examples of what they did long after they had used the sim. They did give us examples of previous sim use from months back. So that's not here, but we saw that.
And
do you see them using a concept that they got from one sim and a later sim? You say, oh, I see that this is electrons flowing.
That happens all the time, actually, for better or worse.
So that would be an interest. I mean, what would be interesting would whether they're applying something correctly to a further sim, or they just, of course, they're going to have access to now all these things and images that they didn't have before. Which, so we all know that part of the major part of learning is pruning back, right? Many people think they know a lot more than they do, and part of the discovery is realizing how much you don't.
I'm not sure what it means to think you know a lot more than you do. I mean, maybe you know what that means.
People who do really stupid things and kill themselves thinking that they.
No, what I mean is that I think there's a lot of implicit learning that goes on, and I think what these students are getting at is that there's one of the narratives that comes out of the simulation and gaming in education literature is that people don't really learn anything useful when they're playing games. They learn how to play the game, but they don't learn any underlying concepts. So you can play Portal, which has all kinds of physics that's all correct, but you're not learning any physics.
They don't learn any traditionally measured concepts that are valued by a particular discourse community.
Right. I'm not even.
Well, maybe
I don't even know if that's. So I think that's on the right track, but I think it needs to be picked apart into something even more concrete, which is in a way saying they can't connect the traditional representations of the discipline to their knowledge.
Right. They're learning something. They're doing something. They're engaging in this, micro world, or and they're succeeding with it. But they're and it may be that it could be the tests themselves that are flawed. The point is, it's not showing up on any, and this is what Valerie was getting at, on any of the measures of the communities that traditionally establish the discipline and use those measures as values of participating in that discipline. Yeah. But the question ultimately, this is actually interesting that we could get around, and I think PhET is a great opportunity to get around it, is it allows us to get away from these ideas of proxy measurements, tests, and actually look at action, which is doing. That's really what we care about, I think. And the question, doing correctly on the kinds of things. Right, of course, but the point is, I don't care whether somebody can bubble in a C on a Scantron sheet. What I want is that stands as proxy for them being able to make an argument about science in ways that I want them to, or to build a cyclotron, or a potato gun, or whatever it happens to be that I'm investing in education for. And PhET, I think, is actually closer to that, which is interesting.
And one of the things is, if you watch students using these sims, and this is how I'm going to tie this all back into all this stuff about making them intuitive tools that allow for productive messing about, is, does what they're doing look like science? Now, you could argue they are or are not doing things correctly, but you have to define correctly. It could be that what they're doing looks very much like scientific discourse, even if they're wrong.
If I go into Pharmaca and I see a UV block that says on its label contains no chemicals, are they just working on a